Welcome to Homestead Reptile. In today's episode on morph history, we're going to look over the furred trait, or furry. So the fur trait is very similar to pinstripe, except the pins are elongated and there's normally a couple of rows of pins going down. It makes the dorsal of the animal look a little furry, a little scattered. That's all it is. It's a simple trait. So this trait is a physical trait, and it's not really known where it really came from. It most likely came out of the wild population. Not too many breeders actually work with furred trait geckos. It's polygenic, and again, it's just the rows of scales. They're thinner, they're longer, and they can be thicker. And they are also scattered, shot through the gecko. They're not a simple line of pins, and I'll show some examples of this guy is a furred gecko, and I'll show some examples of a just normal pinstriped gecko. Right here you can see that dorsal, you can see how it goes, the long spikies, the pinning of the scales, and then you can see how they're kind of scattered, and there's a couple of different rows. So this is one example, and I have another example who is a lily white. So it has it in a more extreme, more exaggerated form. And the lily white gene is also rounding those scales off. So that doesn't have to do with the furred trait, but that's just a part of the lily white gene. But the double stacking of scales, the pinning. So you can see on this head, you can see there's more than one row of scales going down with pinstripe scales. See, when you go down his back, you can see how many, more than one row, how scattered they are. And this is just the fur trait. See right here. But it's the fur trait that's also being influenced by the lily white trait, which is rounding those pinned scales out. But yeah, it's an interesting trait. Not many breeders actually work with it. I don't know of any, actually. Not saying that there aren't, but there just isn't. And this is just a normal pinstripe. You can see the normal pinning of the scales, that straight row. They're kind of short. You can see the difference between this guy and those two that I showed you. And those two that I have just happen to have the trait. I wasn't really looking for geckos that have the fur trait, but this is what it looks like, and it's an interesting trait. Not too many people talk about it, and it's not a very popular trait that I see people going out of their way to produce. I think you could do some really cool stuff with it. It's an interesting trait, and like I said, there's not much known about it from what I said. Everything I know about it can go on a sticky note because there's not a whole lot of information on it, but there's not a whole lot of people working on it. Again, you can see this guy. You can see it almost looks like he has double rows of scales, and this is just a normal pinstripe here.